When my wife said she wanted a divorce, I was devastated. When I found out she'd been cheating on me with my best friend for years, I was destroyed. But when I realized she planned to leave me without a home, without money, and with debts, I started planning her downfall. When Emma walked through our front door that evening, I could sense something was wrong. Her usual warm smile was replaced with a cold, distant expression. 10 years of marriage had taught me to read her moods, but this was different. This wasn't just a bad day at work. "We need to talk, Mark," she said, placing her purse carefully on the kitchen counter. I nodded, my stomach tightening with anticipation. She sat across from me at our dining table, the one I'd restored myself as a 5th anniversary gift. The irony wasn't lost on me that we'd celebrate so many milestones at this table, and now it was witnessing what would be our last conversation as husband and wife. "I want a divorce." Her voice was steady, clinical almost. The words hung in the air between us. 10 years of building a life together, reduced to 4 devastating words. "Why?" I managed to ask, fighting to keep my voice level. Emma sighed, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing patterns on the wooden surface. "I'm just unhappy. We've grown apart. I don't feel the same anymore." I searched her face for any signs of the woman I fell in love with, the one who laughed until she cried at my terrible jokes, who squeezed my hand during scary movies, who once told me I was her forever. But that woman wasn't sitting across from me now. "Can we work on this? Counseling, maybe? A vacation to reconnect?" "No, Mark. I've made up my mind. I've actually." She hesitated. "I've already found an apartment. I'll be moved out by next week." The speed of it all felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a sudden decision, this had been calculated, planned. "You already found a place? How long have you been planning this?" "Does it matter?" she asked, standing up. "I'll start packing tomorrow." Over the next 7 days, I watched as Emma methodically dismantled our shared life. She took only her clothes and personal items, leaving behind the furniture, the wedding photos, the memories. Each day I tried to understand what had happened, where things had gone wrong, but she expertly avoided any real conversation. When she finally left, our house, the one I'd purchased before we got married but had added her name to after the wedding, felt hollow. I wandered from room to room, searching for answers in the spaces she'd vacated. 3 days after Emma moved out, my phone pinged with a message from Tyler, a mutual friend who worked with Emma at the real estate agency. "Hey man, you doing okay? Just checking in." I sent back a non-committal response, not ready to talk about the divorce with anyone. But Tyler's next message changed everything. "You are aware that Emma's been living with Jason for the past year, right?" Jason. My best friend since college. The man who'd been my best man at our wedding. The person I confided in when things got tough at work, when my father died, when Emma and I had struggled to conceive. "What are you talking about?" I texted back, my hands shaking. "Shit, I thought you knew. They've been together for at least a year. Everyone at the office knows. Everyone knew. Everyone except me." Tyler sent a photo, and there they were, Emma and Jason walking out of a restaurant, hands intertwined, looking at each other with the kind of intimate familiarity that only comes from sharing a life. The date stamp showed it was from 6 months ago. I threw my phone across the room, watching as the screen shattered against the wall, a perfect metaphor for my marriage. The betrayal was devastating, but it was the deception that truly broke me. How many dinners had Jason sat at our table, knowing he was sleeping with my wife? How many times had Emma kissed me goodbye in the morning, only to meet him later? I spent that night drinking, cycling through grief, rage, and self-pity. But as the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, something shifted inside me. The fog of emotion cleared, and in its place was a cold clarity. This wasn't just about an affair. This was about calculation. I made coffee and started to think logically. Emma was a real estate agent with an exceptional eye for property value and investment opportunities. She understood money and assets better than anyone I knew. Jason was a corporate lawyer specializing in divorce proceedings. Their affair wasn't just a betrayal of the heart, it was strategic. I opened my laptop and began investigating our finances. What I found made my blood run cold. 2 months ago, Emma had taken out a loan for $50,000 using our joint account as collateral. The money had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. There were also several large purchases on our shared credit card, designer clothes, expensive dinners, weekend getaways, all in the weeks leading up to her announcement. She wasn't just leaving me. She was setting me up for financial ruin. A week later, I received a court summons. Emma was suing for half of our assets, including the house I'd purchased before our marriage, my car, and inexplicably, alimony, despite the fact that she earned nearly as much as I did and we had no children. That's when I knew this war had been orchestrated long before the first shot was fired. But if Emma thought I would roll over and accept defeat, she'd severely underestimated me. I called Stephen Graham, a divorce attorney known for his ruthless effectiveness. At our first meeting, I laid everything out: the affair, the hidden loan, the financial manipulations. They've been clever, Stephen said, reviewing the documents. But not clever enough. The house may have both your names on it now, but we can prove you purchased it before the marriage and have been solely responsible for the mortgage. What about the loan? And the credit card debt? We'll subpoena the bank records. If we can prove she used those funds for the affair or to establish a new household with Mr. Reynolds, we can argue for full financial separation. I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. There's something else. Jason and Emma are living together in an apartment in Westwood. I think I might still be on the lease. When Emma and I had first moved to Los Angeles, we'd rented that apartment while house hunting. The landlord had been an old-school type who preferred long-term tenants and favorable references over credit checks. When we bought our house, rather than break the lease, we'd sublet the apartment to Jason, who had just moved to the city. I'd forgotten all about it until now. Stephen's eyes lit up. If your name is still on that lease, and they're living there together while conducting an affair that predates your separation, well, that's a very interesting development. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I gathered bank statements, phone records, and witness testimonies from friends who had seen Emma and Jason together during our marriage. I discovered that the $50,000 loan had been used as a down payment on a vacation property in Lake Tahoe, registered in both their names. The most damning evidence came from the apartment. Not only was my name still on the lease, but Emma had been paying the rent from our joint account for over a year, essentially using my money to fund her love nest with Jason. I also learned that Emma had been systematically undermining me professionally. As a software engineer, I'd been developing a program that several major companies were interested in. Emma had access to my home office and my preliminary contracts. I discovered she'd been feeding information to Jason, who had connections with competing firms. They'd been positioning themselves to profit from my work once the divorce was finalized. Each new betrayal hardened my resolve. This wasn't just about saving myself financially, it was about justice. The day of our court hearing arrived. Emma walked in with Jason by her side, both in expensive suits, exuding confidence. When she saw me, she offered a small, almost pitying smile. She thought this was already won. "Your Honor," her attorney began, "my client is seeking an equitable division of assets acquired during the marriage, including the family home, joint savings, and appropriate spousal support." I sat quietly, watching Emma's performance. She dabbed at non-existent tears, describing how she'd supported my career, how she'd invested her heart and soul into our marriage while I had grown distant and neglectful. When it was our turn, Stephen rose calmly. "Your Honor, we have evidence that not only refutes Mrs. Pearson's claims but demonstrates a systematic pattern of financial and personal betrayal." He methodically presented our evidence, the house purchase predating our marriage, bank records showing I'd made every mortgage payment, the $50,000 loan Emma had taken out without my knowledge, and the credit card statements showing lavish spending that coincided with dates she and Jason had been together. Emma's face grew increasingly pale as Stephen continued. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have documentation proving that Mrs. Pearson has been engaged in an adulterous relationship with Mr. Jason Reynolds for at least 1 year prior to filing for divorce. They have been cohabitating in an apartment where Mr. Pearson is still legally a tenant, with rent paid from the couple's joint account. Emma leaned over to whisper urgently to her attorney, who looked increasingly concerned. Most disturbingly, Stephen continued, we have evidence that Mrs. Pearson and Mr. Reynolds have used confidential information from Mr. Pearson's business dealings to benefit themselves financially, constituting a breach of fiduciary duty to the marital estate. By now, Emma was visibly shaking. Jason, who had been sitting smugly in the gallery, had lost all color in his face. The judge reviewed our documentation carefully before speaking. Based on the evidence presented, I find that the family residence was purchased prior to the marriage by Mr. Pearson and shall remain his sole property. Furthermore, Mrs. Pearson is ordered to repay the $50,000 loan in full to Mr. Pearson, plus interest. The joint credit card debt accrued during the period of the affair shall be Mrs. Pearson's sole responsibility. Emma stood up, her composure finally breaking. That's not fair. We built that life together. Mrs. Pearson, the judge said sternly, the court finds your conduct related to marital finances and property to be egregious. You're fortunate Mr. Pearson isn't pursuing criminal charges for financial fraud. As we left the courthouse, I felt no triumph, only a hollow vindication. But the story wasn't over. Within a month, everything unraveled for Emma and Jason. The apartment landlord, learning of the subletting arrangement that violated the lease terms, evicted them. The Lake Tahoe property, which they could no longer afford without the money from our divorce settlement, went into foreclosure. The professional connections that Jason had cultivated through his betrayal dried up when the story of their affair became known. Then came the final blow. The tech company Emma had been secretly sharing my work with was sued for corporate espionage. Jason, implicated in the lawsuit, was disbarred. Their carefully constructed future collapsed like a house of cards. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, I received a text from Emma. Can we talk? Please. I've made terrible mistakes. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. The woman who walked in bore little resemblance to my ex-wife. Gone were the designer clothes and confident stride. She looked exhausted, defeated. Mark, I don't know what to say. Everything's fallen apart. Her voice cracked. Jason left. He said he couldn't handle the financial stress. The irony, right? He's moved in with his new paralegal. I sipped my coffee, feeling nothing. What do you want, Emma? I need help. I have nowhere to go, no money. The court garnished my wages for the loan repayment. I can't even afford a studio apartment. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of mine. I know I hurt you terribly. I got caught up in something. I thought I wanted more excitement, more status. Jason made me feel special, important. But it was all a lie. Like our marriage? She flinched. Our marriage wasn't a lie. Not at the beginning. I did love you, Mark. I just lost my way. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd walked out of our home. I searched for any sign of genuine remorse, any flicker of the woman I had once loved so completely. What exactly are you asking for? I thought maybe I could stay in the guest room, just until I get back on my feet. Or a loan to get started somewhere new. Anything, Mark. I'm desperate. I considered her request, weighing it against everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to help her, the part that remembered our good years, the dreams we'd shared. But another part, the part that had been forged in the fire of her betrayal, knew better. You destroyed everything we built together, Emma. You lied, cheated, and tried to leave me with nothing. And now you want my help. She began to cry, real tears this time. I know I don't deserve it. But I have nowhere else to go. I stood up, placing enough money on the table to cover both our coffees. You're right. You don't deserve it. As I walked away, I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, no pleasure in her downfall. Just a quiet certainty that sometimes, justice happens on its own. I rebuilt my life slowly. The software I'd developed was eventually sold to a major tech firm. I moved to a smaller house near the beach, something I'd always wanted but Emma had vetoed. I made new friends, dated occasionally, but kept my walls high. Sometimes I drive past our old neighborhood and wonder if things could have been different. If I'd noticed the signs earlier. If I'd been a different kind of husband. But those thoughts don't haunt me like they once did. Emma reached out several more times over the following years. Sometimes asking for help, sometimes just to talk. I never responded. Not out of cruelty, but because some chapters need to stay closed. She created her own downfall. I just made sure I wasn't standing underneath when everything collapsed. The lesson I learned wasn't about revenge, but about self-preservation. About recognizing when someone sees you not as a partner, but as a resource to be exploited. I don't know where Emma is now. I heard she moved back to her hometown, started over. I hope she found whatever she was looking for. As for me, I have my life back. Different, scarred, but mine. And that's enough.